Versatile presets can be a little bit like Swiss Army knife guitars, where you lose a little bit of uniqueness when trying to cover a lot of ground. Although today I'll be working with my Fractal FM3 with the new firmware update, this also works with like a Helix, Kemper, Neural, whatever, or just a really versatile pedalboard. I don't mean that every tone we're about to dial in is going to be the most generic thing you've ever heard, but that we have to keep CPU usage in mind when dialing in those things with a little extra flavor and uniqueness like stereo chorus, tremolo, ultra res cabs, and super high quality reverbs and delay. We're still going to dial in a lot of great sounds. They might just not be super specific to a genre, which is the point. So for cleans, I'm going to go with the Fender 65 Reissue Deluxe. It can get dark enough for jazz, but still bright enough with every other genre. Although I happen to love other Fender amps as well, like the Twin Reverb for instance might just be a bit too bright for this scenario. I really want something that can cover a lot of ground. If I'm using a darker sounding guitar, I might go with a Vox or Morgan amp, and if you want to hear the difference between a lot of the clean tone amps, check out this video I did comparing a whole bunch of them. I personally would also use a little bit of compression here, although that's up to you. When it comes to reverbs with this preset though, I would actually avoid the spring reverb solely because sometimes that can sound a bit more folky, a bit more Americana, a bit more blues, and a bit more specifically those genres. A room reverb is actually going to be the way you'd want to go, I think, because it's not going to stand out in some super unique way, but it's going to be really pleasing to the ear. Although I happen to like slapback, I might not choose it for my clean tone, solely because I want to be able to turn that on and off. I want to be able to turn on the country, turn off the country. But for my main tone, I would either not have delay or I'd have like 40 or 50 milliseconds of delay just to use as like a thickening agent. There are two different approaches that I would go with when going with a mid-gain tone. I could use a pedal with the amp I just used for cleans, or I could have an amp dedicated to this tone. For me, it can kind of depend on the genre. If overdriven guitar is like the centerpiece of an arrangement, then I'll go with a Marshall or Friedman sound, although sometimes in certain genres that might be too aggressive, and I might be better off with the overdrive pedal in front of a clean amp. Sometimes it's helpful to use the options that the FM3 gives you and get both sounds. This leads me to a humongous insight I had recently thanks to local studio guitar wizard Dylan Gorenberg. We were A-Bing tones on our FM3s when I realized I'd always gone with the recommended 4x12 cabinet when using a Marshall or a Friedman. I always enjoyed the sound in my headphones, but when moving to an FR/FR or a live situation, it was always a bit of a headache to manage the EQ between a 1x12 Fender and a 4x12 Marshall or Friedman. This led me to having an EQ block dedicated to each amp, which sometimes helped and sometimes just made things more complicated. Turns out I just never picked a 1x12 or 2x12 for these Marshall or Friedmans, and that solves my problem. Granted, there's not as many 1x12 or 2x12 cabinets as there are 4x12, but there's still a good amount of options and you'll really get what you need. That's just something I discovered recently that I'm going to have a lot of fun experimenting with. Also, that's just something to keep in mind if you plan on going this route. So lastly, there's the lead tone. This can vary quite a lot for me personally, really depending on what kind of music I'm playing. If I'm playing a song that has almost anything to do with the 80s, chances are I'm going to want that Marshall or Friedman sound. Dialing in some cool blues rock lead and then playing an 80s arena rock song can feel really awkward when you're going for those soaring single note lines. Conversely, dialing in some high gain sound with like 400 milliseconds of delay and huge reverb and all this other stuff, and then playing Sweet Home Alabama can really feel like a guitarist at the wrong gig situation. This is where I would actually go back to the mid-gain tones and use the Friedman or Marshall that I have set to like a little bit of dirt. I'd use that for probably most of my leads, maybe with a little pedal in front of it to give it a little extra boost. And then I would have another Marshall or Friedman cranked, and I would use that for that like remaining 20% where I need like some 80s gain. For any Fractal users out there, please consider reaching out from the links below, and I'll gladly send you this preset if you want it for yourself. So please let me know in the comments if you think there's anything I missed or anything you would do differently. Again, although I'm using the FM3, I think this is pretty applicable to the Helix, Kemper, and Neural, and especially pedal boards that have all of these kind of amp-in-a-box sounds. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all next week.